Good morning. My name is Dr. Carrie Arnold. Today is September 19, 2020. Thank you for joining us on this webinar. I apologize for a little bit of background noise on my end. I'm going to quickly introduce our speaker. I'm the program director of the Certificate of Evidence-Based Coaching at Fielding Graduate University, and I'm delighted to have Asma Batool joining us. She's actually joining us from India, and her background is great. She's an actual graduate of the Evidence-Based Coaching program. She is a team coach for the United Nations. She has worked with clients in over 23 different countries, and she's a researcher on neuroscience. And Asma, I know you have a lot to share with us, so I am delighted to turn the presentation over to you and let you begin.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Carrie. Welcome, everybody. It is so great to see you all. I'm glad to be walking a section of the chapter with all of you here today. But before I do that, very quickly, if you can type in the chat box as to that one thing that you would want to take away from today's presentation, what does interest you about neuroscience? I'll just give a couple of minutes so that everybody can share their answers in the chat box. The plasticity of the brain, real world application or practice, yes. Potential, wow. How we don't always do what we know we should. How to utilize it when educating clients, yes. Application to real world business and political choices, yes. Knowing more of how the brain processes feelings and thoughts. Great, some great responses, thank you. So we'll be covering hopefully most of it. Application of research to what is normally thought of as a soft science. Coaching's positive impact, yeah, that's one lovely subject. And how to more effectively ensure maximization of utility for personal clients. Fascinated with neuroscience, almost retread into field. My daughter and son-in-law have PhDs from USC. Yes. How to reinforce change in learning. So thank you, such valuable inputs. So one thing I would like to share is that, is everybody able to hear me clearly? Okay. I'm going ahead with the assumption that everybody is able to hear me clearly. Okay, okay, sure. So writing this chapter about neuroscience has provided me with a more deeper appreciation of the value that our brain provides to foster our agenda as coaches and practitioners towards learning and development. And what I can see from the responses in here is that most of you are looking at a similar sort of a value and purpose from today's presentation, which is what I'm going to try and deliver today. So very quickly, looking at the agenda, I'm going to walk through, take you through a quick overview of the brain, the limbic system, what happens during stress, how do we how do we direct the attention from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex, leverage stress as a challenge by choice, and how do we engage with listening as a skill to foster growth mindset and vertical development. So I'm going to start off with a quick overview of the neuroanatomy and the neurophysiology of the brain. This is probably going to take approximately 10 minutes, but this will provide you a fundamental context as to what exactly we're talking about. So what you see here is the sideways view of the human brain. Here is the front of the brain, the front of the head, and this is the back of the head. So the cerebral cortex is divided into 4 major hemispheres or lobes: the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe at the top and back, the occipital lobe at the back, and the temporal lobe. The frontal lobe is composed of 2 major regions, which is the prefrontal cortex and the motor cortex. The prefrontal cortex, as we all know, is responsible for executive functioning. So problem solving, decision making, rationalization, and even irrationalization for that matter. And the motor cortex is responsible for all body movement, voluntary control of our skeletal muscles. Here you see the Broca's area, which is responsible for speech production, controlling the muscles of speech. Right next to the motor cortex, we have the somatosensory cortex, which is responsible for all sensory inputs. So all sensory information coming in from all parts of the body, touch, temperature, pain, pressure, etc. So think about it this way. The motor cortex helps you reach out and grab a cup of coffee that is in front of you. And the somatosensory cortex helps you understand the weight, the temperature, or the pressure of that coffee cup in your hand. The parietal lobe is responsible for spatial processing or spatial manipulation, where we are in space and relative to our positioning, where other objects or other locations are in space. So going back to the previous example, the coffee cup in front of the grabbing a coffee cup that is in front of you, the prefrontal cortex helps plan the movement, the motor cortex helps complete the movement, and the parietal cortex helps us understand where the coffee cup is in front of us. And all this happens so quickly and so intimately that we just don't feel the difference. So for one moment, think about mindfulness. What is mindfulness? Mindfulness is about providing, our complete undivided attention to a single activity without judgment, in the process of retraining our brain to achieve a sense of calm, presence, more creativity, more focus, and to reduce stress. So drinking tea or coffee is a sensory experience that lends itself to mindfulness. And I'm assuming most of us are coffee drinkers or tea drinkers, and we usually like to indulge ourselves for a cup of coffee or tea per day. So just taking 5 minutes out of your daily routine to fully appreciate this process of drinking tea or coffee not just enables you to appreciate the quality and flavor of your drink, but will also allow you to achieve a sense of optimization, a mindful sense in the brain as part of your daily routine. So moving on, the occipital lobe is responsible for visual processing. So while we see with our eyes in the front of the head, the information goes all the way to the back of the brain for visual processing. The temporal lobe is our primary auditory cortex. Remember when we were talking about the frontal lobe, we spoke about the Broca's area responsible for speech production. Here is the Wernicke's area, which overlaps with the parietal lobe as well, which is responsible for language processing and language comprehension. So generally, the cerebral lobes do a lot more than what we are discussing out here right now, but this is more of a general overview as we proceed forward. So moving on to the hindbrain, which is the cerebellum and the brainstem. The cerebellum, the major function of the cerebellum is the coordination of all voluntary movement. And it also helps fine-tune these movements to make them smooth, which is probably the reason why our hand directly goes to the coffee cup and not to the left or the right of it, because the cerebellum is coordinating this movement. Sorry about this. Yeah. The brainstem is composed of the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata, and it connects the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the spinal cord. And there are a lot of associated cranial nerves in the brainstem. So there are a lot of functions that the brainstem does, but the most important one being that it controls the autonomic functions such as circulation, respiration, digestion, or critical organ system movements. So you must have heard of the gray matter and the white matter. So very quickly on this, the gray matter is the pink stuff. I'm not really sure why they call it the gray matter though. So it is the pink stuff, the outermost layer made up of unmyelinated cell bodies. And we commonly refer to this as the cerebral cortex. The white matter, along with this gray matter nuclei that you're seeing in here, is referred to as the subcortical cerebrum. And because it lies beneath the cerebral cortex. So one important part of the subcortical cerebrum is the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum connects the right and the left cerebral hemispheres and enables the transfer of information between the left and the right cerebral hemispheres. There is a bunch of subcortical nuclei that function as one unit, and they are known as the basal ganglia. The basal ganglia helps in motor movement, and it is also responsible for emotion, cognitive processing, etc. So here we have the thalamus, another bunch of subcortical nuclei, which is the thalamus here, also known as the diencephalon. The thalamus is known as the sensory relay station because all the sensory inputs have pathways that travel via the thalamus, And there is also early order processing that happens in the thalamus, which continues as it moves to the various areas of the cerebral cortex. Also, the thalamus is responsible for higher order functioning such as emotion, cognition, and consciousness, as it is connected to many, many dense areas. Right below the thalamus, we have the hypothalamus, the beak-like structure that you see here. And this structure connects to and maintains the pituitary gland. We know that the pituitary gland is the master gland that connects and controls all the glands in the endocrine system. So here, hence, the hypothalamus is responsible for interacting and controlling the endocrine system. And it does that by triggering the release of hormones in the blood. And these hormones are epinephrine and norepinephrine, also known as adrenaline and noradrenaline. Also, the hypothalamus is responsible for basic drives like hunger, thirst, sleep, sex, etc. And now we come to the amygdala. Normally, when there's a neuroscience presentation, amygdala is more like the glamour quotient. It brings the glamour quotient in any neuroscience presentation because everybody wants to know about the amygdala. So amygdala is called the aggression center because if you stimulate the amygdala, we produce feelings of anger and violence, fear and anxiety. However, if the amygdala is subdued or disinhibited, we lose out on our survival tendencies, act out impulsively, engage in reckless and dangerous things. Now, the next one is the hippocampus, which plays an important role in the formation of new memories. And it does that by converting the short-term memory into long-term memory. So if the hippocampus is damaged, it's difficult for us to form new memories, and the evidence of what you have experienced in the present moment, that basically fades away. The interesting thing though is that if the hippocampus is damaged or destroyed, while the new memories are difficult to form, the old memories remain intact. Hence the long-term memory functions just fine. So the amygdala, the hypothalamus, the thalamus, and the hippocampus together make up the limbic system. And we know that the limbic system is responsible for managing and regulating stress. So moving on, let's take a look at our body's response to our body's response to stress, which is the fight or flight response. The fight or flight response revolves around the workings of the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord, and the endocrine system. On the nervous system side of things, we have the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. When we activate the sympathetic nervous system, there are a lot of effects that take place, such as dilation of pupils. Like whenever we perceive a threat, so say a car coming towards us at great speed, our pupils dilate, our eyes open wide to identify and accommodate the danger. So our pupils dilate and there's a decrease in saliva. We feel our mouth and throat going dry. There is increased heart rate to supply more oxygen and nutrients to all parts of the body. Increased respiratory rate to pump more oxygen in the blood. Increased peripheral vasoconstriction. The blood vessels in the peripheral parts, such as the arms and legs, they tighten and constrict to pump more blood into the crucial areas. Then, because this is a threat situation and liver is a major storage site for glucose that helps in producing energy, it releases lots of glucose to help us produce energy that helps in fight or flee. Also, the sympathetic nervous system works in tandem with the endocrine system. So the adrenal glands situated at the top of our kidneys, they are stimulated. And from the medulla of the adrenal glands, the hormones epinephrine and norepinephrine are released. They are also known as adrenaline and noradrenaline. And from the cortex of the adrenal glands, the major stress hormone cortisol is released, which is responsible for redistributing glucose to all parts of the body and suppressing our digestion, immune system, and ovulation. So these are the effects of the sympathetic nervous system. Now coming to the parasympathetic nervous system, let me just take off this to the other side. Yeah. So the parasympathetic nervous system puts our body in rest and digest mode, basically the relaxed state. And it affects the same areas, but in the opposite ways. So pupils constrict, there is an increase in saliva because a digestion is taking place. The respiratory rate and the heart rate are operating in normal levels because we do not need the increased oxygenation. Glucose starts getting stored because we are extracting the nutrients from the food, which helps in producing energy. So there's a lot of glucose storage that happens in the liver. And there's a decrease in the hormones epinephrine, norepinephrine, and increase in digestion. And this is how the parasympathetic nervous system takes place in our body. So very quickly, let's put all this together. So when we perceive a threat or a danger, the thalamus, the sensory information flows through the pathways of the thalamus, and early order processing of the sensory information also takes place. The amygdala picks up from where the thalamus left off and triggers the alert mechanism, the fight and flight mechanism, the body stress response. But it also refers the information to the hippocampus because it has to understand whether the threat has occurred earlier or not. So when the amygdala is working in tandem with the hippocampus, the hypothalamus relays the information through the brainstem, which activates the autonomic nervous system. Since there's a fight or flight response, the sympathetic nervous system is activated. However, if the amygdala understands that this is not a threat mode, then it quickly relays the information to the prefrontal cortex, which puts the brain in the higher order executive functioning and the normal mode of identifying and perceiving information. So this is how a body responds during stress. So any questions that come to anyone in the audience? Because now we are going to move to the prefrontal cortex. So we are good to proceed. Getting more into parasympathetic. Do you want me, Elena, do you want me to repeat the workings of the parasympathetic nervous system? Okay, going forward, no, we are not going to go much into parasympathetic in the presentation because this is more about the stress response that we are talking about and the optimal functioning of the prefrontal cortex. So in the later part of the presentation, we don't have the parasympathetic nervous system. All right, so moving forward, we know that the prefrontal cortex is essential for executive functioning, allowing us to organize and plan for the future and inhibit our distractions to achieve a goal. It is important for us to understand how and when does the prefrontal cortex function optimally, and to do so, we are going to look closely into two catecholamines, which is the dopamine and the norepinephrine. The dopamine and the norepinephrine, we'll refer to them as DA and NE, and the prefrontal cortex, we will refer to them as PFC. So we know that the norepinephrine is synthesized in the adrenal glands in the body. The synthesis site for norepinephrine in the brain is in locus coeruleus in the brainstem. Similarly, the synthesis site for dopamine in the brain is ventral tegmental area and substantia nigra, these two structures in the brainstem. But for the purpose of the discussion here, we are going to focus on VTA, the ventral tegmental area. So both the dopamine and norepinephrine are projected from the brainstem to various parts of the to the various parts of the cerebral cortex, that is the prefrontal, frontal, motor, somatosensory, and the occipital cortices via the mesocortical pathway. And from the brainstem, both the dopamine and norepinephrine are projected to the limbic system via the mesolimbic pathway. So, yeah. When both dopamine and norepinephrine are present in lower levels or higher levels in the prefrontal cortex, the function of the prefrontal cortex is impaired. So think about it like a chemical switch. When both DA and NE are present in poor levels, too little DA and NE in the prefrontal cortex, the chemical switch for PFC is turned off, and our PFC exists in a non-alert, relaxed state. When there's too much DA and NE, then the amygdala is triggered and we exist in a stress state. When moderate levels of DA and NE exist in the PFC, the chemical switch for PFC is turned on, and that's where optimal functioning of the PFC happens, which provides us with guided attention and responses and keeps us focused, organized, and flexible, basically the higher order functioning that happens in the brain. This inverted U relationship that you're seeing here is also illustrated by the Yerkus-Dodson curve, which states that when we experience lower or higher levels in intensity, our performance is impaired. So consider this with an example. Say, learning to drive a car. So if you're experiencing so much fear that we are not going to step out of the house to learn to drive the car, then it is not helpful. If you're experiencing no fear at all, then we end up driving the car recklessly and put ours and others' lives in danger. But if we have the right amount of fear inside us, then we learn to drive the car with the right amount of expertise and do it well. So this is how generally this is illustrated. So Elena, I see a question here, but I'll probably come back to it later when we are having the Q&As. Okay, so now that we have understood how our body responds to stress mode, so very quickly, let us take this example. Okay, Paul is a strong one-on-one communicator and manager. His boss Timothy is happy with his performance and is thinking of promoting him to the next level. Today afternoon, Timothy has an annual stakeholder meeting. 10 minutes before the meeting, Timothy communicates to Paul that he wants him to present to the stakeholders this time. Which reflexes does Paul express? So I would like you to either put your responses in the chat box, or basically just shout it out. Unmute yourself and just shout it out. So the first one, his mind goes blank. He is in great doubt. When he does manage to string a few words together, his presentation sounds artificial and robotic. Which reflex is this between fight, flight, and freeze? Freeze. Great. Yeah. He remains quiet, acts as if he did not hear, moves to the other side of the table, and quickly takes a seat at the other side in the audience. He hopes that it will just fade away or be forgotten.
Flight.
Flight. Great. Paul is taken aback. He picks up and almost finishes the entire bottle of water. He looks at Timothy. Sorry, I'm actually trying to. Okay, I'll just minimize this. Sorry about that. Yeah. So Paul is taken aback. He picks up and almost finishes the entire bottle of water. He looks at Timothy, then at the table and at the audience, and in a frenzy, he leaves the meeting room. Flight. He complains and argues about the injustice of what is being asked. He creates a tense environment to get out of the situation by showing an intense emotional reaction to the conflict. Fight. He tries and comes up with a false excuse or use lies, such as having to go to another meeting soon in order to get out of the situation.
Right.
Yeah, I like that fight and flight, because this does seem to be a balance between fight and flight. He uses distraction tactics by pulling others into the discussion or moving the focus away from the requested task.
Right.
Flight. He professionally acknowledges what's been asked of him, and at the same time, he tries and formulates a compromise of perhaps being given more time to prepare so that everyone could benefit from the discussion. Yes, which response is this? This is the PFC in action, the prefrontal cortex in action. A solution is reached at the end of the discussion following the above step, where all people involved seem satisfied with the outcome. This again is the prefrontal cortex in action. The difference between operating from the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex is generally a matter of a few more deep breaths, because when we take a few more deep breaths, that breathing is actually the connecting portal between the consciousness and the unconsciousness, and so it opens the door and it directs attention to the prefrontal cortex. It directs the energy, the oxygen and the glucose to the prefrontal cortex. So whenever we are in the stress situation, all it takes is a pause, then take a few deep breaths, probably count backwards from 1 to 10, and then the energy has already been moved to the prefrontal cortex by that time. And then when you give the response, it's the optimal solutioning that's happening over there. Make sense? All right, so moving on. This is important to understand how to leverage challenge as an opportunity to either increase the performance of leaders, or basically that's what acts as an impeding performance in leaders, barriers of the performance to leaders. When we acknowledge stress as a threat, we know what happens. Our body shifts to fight and flight response. We act out impulsively and go through the motions. But when we are actually considering stress as a challenge, we change our approach to navigating stress. And if considering stress as a challenge is happening by external motivation, then it happens in one of the two ways, which is the traditional carrot and stick approach, or when we tell people what to do, the expert advice giving way. So we know about the carrot and stick approach. Rewards, punishment works very effectively in the short term, but from a long-term perspective, it doesn't really sustain. What happens when we tell people what to do, when we are providing advice to our clients, to people in terms of suggesting solutions to them? What happens then? I would love to get a few responses from the audience on this.
Asma, I would say at best we would get compliance over commitment.
Yes, right. Not much imagination or creativity happening in there. It's more robotic. Usually get resistance if they are not ready to hear it. Great. They're not developing self-reliance. Yes. Yeah, all these answers are like
externally motivated.
Externally motivated. Yes. Right. Yeah, so all these are great answers, and this is what actually happens in terms of outcomes. Have you heard of the yes but syndrome? So let's consider a quick example. Peter, I would like to start my own business. Coach, that's great. So do you have an idea about the business you would like to start? Peter, yes, but the idea is not fully developed as yet. Coach, okay, maybe you should get a few mentors who can help you build your idea. Peter, yeah, I should do that, but not sure who to talk to about this. Coach, oh, I can help. I know a couple of mentors who have helped other first-time entrepreneurs, so I can introduce you to them if you like. Peter, yeah, that's nice, but not sure if this is the right time for me yet. You see the yes buts there, the pattern that's coming up? That's basically the yes but excuse syndrome. So very clearly, one thing that comes out over here is that Peter does not have an issue with resources. He has an issue with attitude and resourcefulness. And as you called out rightly, it's a defensive approach. Our defenses are going to come out, and we are going to kind of go with compliance. And if we do that to kids, they are probably going to act the expert advice way, but not really use their imagination or their creativity to think about it. Right, there is no co-creation that's happening. So when we consider stress as a challenge, but engage in it by conscious choice, there is internal motivation. And because this is internal motivation, we are self-accountable towards our goals. In fact, we are working with a fixed, focused goal in mind. And this is what the beauty about coaching is, allowing the client to explore and figure out their own solutions to their problems, right? And there is a neuroscientific base to coaching as well. When the client explores their own solutions and solves their own problems, there's a surge in adrenaline that happens in the body, right? And when the client is trying to figure out their own insights, or that when that aha moment occurs, the prefrontal cortex is working in total optimal mode. That's the neuroscientific base for coaching, right? So one more approach about engaging with stress as a, yes, do you have a question? All right. So when we engage with stress as a challenge by choice, one more approach that comes is paying close attention to a mental experience. So what happens when we pay close attention to a mental experience? The mental experience that we are paying close attention to, those circuits get alive in the brain. They become activated. Over a period of time, they are consolidated and stabilized. Eventually, as and how we keep paying attention to the same mental experience, those circuits become lasting, permanent changes in the brain structure. So let's take an example here. This is a dense jungle, and we are trying to walk from one end of the jungle to the other. And when we are doing that, we have to push aside the branches. We are not really sure where our feet is landing in front of us, and it's difficult, right? So over time, as and how many travelers keep using the same path, that grassy path becomes flattened, and we are able to kind of, it becomes this this very used, well-worn hiker's trail. Something similar is what happens in the brain. When we focus on something with behaviors, thoughts, or feelings, we are creating a pathway in the brain. And over time, as and how you keep doing that repeatedly, then it becomes lasting changes, physical changes to the brain's architecture. Right? And then coming to meditation. Do you know that the actual mechanism that the meditation activates in the brain is the prefrontal cortex, right? And it does that by shifting the body from the stress response to the relaxation response. Also, there are a lot of research studies that state that the gray matter increases in the prefrontal cortex with increased meditation over time, and which is one of the reasons why the prefrontal cortex of meditators is larger than that of non-meditators. In fact, there are specific studies from Harvard, Yale, and Massachusetts that indicate that with increased meditation over time, that improves the cortical plasticity in adults, and that improves, that is responsible for emotional and cognitive processing, and even emotional regulation, emotional balance of the brain, right? So that's about stress as a challenge by choice. So any questions that you have, any inputs, any comments that you would like to share? All right.
This is Suzanne.
Asma,
Yes.
Oh,
yeah, Asma, there's a question, a great one in the chat box around method of medication and how that might maybe impact the neuroscience.
Well, the method of medication in terms of the intensity of the exercise that you're going to utilize, the kind of time that the meditation, the time of meditation that actually happens, and how much you're able to kind of really bring yourself forward into a mindful state, right? That matters. If the method dictates that, then the medication, the kind of meditation that you do actually matters. But otherwise, the method does not really matter. Because using mindfulness or meditation, we are directing attention to our brain. And it depends on you. The control lies with us. How we are directing that attention, where do we want to focus? That lies with us. Yes, Suzanne, you were trying to ask something?
I was wondering about people who have certain neurological conditions, such as attention deficit, Tourette syndrome, other kinds of processing difficulties. Have they done studies to see if the meditation has an impact with people who might have these conditions?
That's a wonderful question, Suzanne. Yes, that's very, very true. There are a lot of studies, a lot of research that has already happened in these areas. In fact, depending on the kind of neuro disorder that you're referring to, this particular research that has been done on that neuro disorder, which also states and brings forward a lot of evidence that mindfulness and meditation helps a lot in overcoming those disorders. So if you can kind of, if you want to write to me about this, particularly talking about a particular disorder, I can even share those case studies with you.
Fantastic. That's great. Thank you so much.
Sure. So yeah, moving on. Yes. So the last method of engaging with stress as a challenge by conscious choice is listening. And I wanted to really spend some good time here about how we can use listening as a skill to nurture growth mindset and vertical development. I'm just going to minimize this so that I can see this. Yeah. So let's look at this. Who I am in terms of where I am right now and what do I understand about myself, and who I want to be in future. Between who I am and who I want to be, there exists a gap, right? There is another dimension, which is between who I am and how others see me or perceive me. There exists another gap here, right? Here. So one is the gap between who I am and who I want to be. The other is the gap between who I am and how others see me, the projection that I do in terms of my identity and the kind of and the way I come across to other people, right? And this gap, as we are kind of growing up in our early formative years, this gap is very small, right? But further, as we keep growing in skills, through life, in wisdom, in capacities, this gap keeps becoming bigger and bigger and wider and wider. And the more wider and bigger this gap is, our psyche holds a tension inside us. And that tension makes us very closed and defensive. We operate with a lot of defensive mechanisms. We operate with a fixed mindset. And everything, the moment we come across a failure, we have this approach of saying, it happened. I just, it can never happen to me. I can never succeed. That never becomes pretty much a word in your dictionary. And, we operate with so much defenses out of our fear and sometimes our ignorance that it's literally like sitting in a room with our windows totally barred and closed, right? We are not open to accommodating change. We are not open to listening. We do not want to hear any information. Information does not travel and information does not go out, right? And therefore, I'll just complete this and then come to this one over here. Okay, and that's a beautiful point. Okay, so as we are moving from this closed state and trying to be a little more curious, right? And we are opening to listening. What happens is we open that window a little bit to allow some amount of light to enter the room, and then we are operating with an open mind and we want to listen. Earlier here, when we are in this closed and defensive state, we are not listening at all. Even if we are listening, it's without a desire to understand the other person. But here, when we are listening to accommodate the other person, but listening only at the data level. And why is that? Because data is very easy to calculate, to analyze. And I'm still kind of playing in a comfort zone for myself. I want to be comfortable, right? I'm still operating out of certain amount of fear and anxiety and ignorance, right? My defenses are not totally open. I'm not letting go of my defenses yet. So I want to listen to data that is very easily measurable. And where this data should come in as zeros and ones, absolutes, black and white, true or false, right or wrong, because then I can confirm or disconfirm the data and I can easily problem solve and I can finish off, close the chapter. That's where I operate from a curious state, but with an open mind. And then slowly, as and how things happen and I become more curious and more compassionate, right? I have kind of opened the window a little more and allowing the light to enter the room, right? And over here, when I'm operating with a lot of compassion and curiosity, I'm ready to listen a lot more beyond the data, to understand and listen to data that is about people, about relationships, about shared wisdom, about empathy and compassion, about the uniqueness, diversity, and individuality of people, teamwork, and the power of the human connection. I'm able to accommodate all those different perspectives because now I'm feeling very comfortable. And I'm feeling very comfortable and happy because this gap is narrowing slowly for me, right? And my tension in my psyche, in my self-image, that decreases. And as we continue forward, right, we are practicing curiosity, we are more compassionate, and now we are courageous. So we have kind of opened the window completely and allowing the sunlight to enter the room and soaking in the warmth of that sunlight. And we are operating with an open mind, an open heart, and an open will together. And for the first time ever, we have decided to listen to ourselves, to me, to that inner voice in myself, to understand who I am, where am I going, what am I doing, my self-care, my self-mastery, my purpose, right? And I also try and understand the beauty and the ugliness inside me, right? And I try and understand the good and the bad inside me. So I'm embracing my authentic self. I'm appreciating and acknowledging the light and the shadow inside me. And thus I continue forward, literally shedding all the barriers or throwing open all the defenses, trying to accommodate the change, listening to life, listening to others, listening to myself, such that I listen with an infinite wisdom, such that I know everything and yet I know nothing, and begin on another journey altogether. So there is one question here. Is there also a gap between who I am and who I think I am? That's a beautiful question. So here, if you actually see this who I am, there are two parts to us. One is my authentic self. The other one is my delusional self. The delusional self is that part which craves for the identity that I want and show myself to be. There is not much distinction between my authentic self and my delusional self, because these are merged and they are sitting inside me. It takes a lot of courage and a lot of vulnerability to be able to distinguish these and pull these aside and say, hey, this is what I am in reality, but this is what I crave to be. And there's a difference between these two. And that's another inner gap that exists and creates a tension in this dynamic, right? So let's move a little more forward. Okay, so this is the 4 levels of listening that we proceed with to kind of meet that gap, narrow that gap. So at level 1, we are downloading. And here we are closed and defensive. At factual listening level 2, we are operating with an open mind and we are curious. At empathic listening level 3, we have opened our mind and operating with an open heart. And here we are curious and compassionate. And at the generative listening level 4, our mind, our heart, and our will are all open, and we are curious, compassionate, and courageous, right? So downloading level 1, to quickly go into this, when we listen, it's without a desire to understand the other person. And while we are portraying that we are listening, we are accessing the voice deep inside our head. And what we have here are preconceived emotions, preconceived judgments and assumptions, because the outcome for us is to reconfirm what we already know. Nothing new penetrates the bubble, right? So a quick example in terms of in conversations and in leadership, in the language of leadership, how does it show up, right? So this is a quick example. I don't like doing group meetings. Don't get me wrong. If I need a group meeting, I'll call one. Even if I do, I use those meetings mainly to keep everybody informed about my latest ideas and review progress. Problem in group meetings is that people tend to hold back. I have tried getting people engaged by communicating excellent ideas, using forceful arguments and even provocative questions. But everyone just sits back and plays it safe. There's a classic example as to what happens with us when we are not listening and when we are not ready to kind of allow any information from the outside to enter us, right? So we assert opinions strongly, hold back information, ignore or deny. So moving to factual listening level 2, here we have shifted our focus from self to accommodate the other person who's talking. But the accommodation happens only at the data level, which is why we are allowing the data to talk to us in terms of facts, information, and metrics. And we take that data in terms of absolutes, black and white, zeros and ones, right and wrong, as I called out earlier, right? Because our orientation, our focus is to solve the problem very quickly and achieve a closure. We are operating from the outside from a rational perspective. And, we want to just kind of either confirm or disconfirm the data, right? So going back here and, looking at a quick example of what happens when we are doing factual listening. We usually meet once a week. I start by doing updates and sharing important information that helps the team to move forward. A couple of months earlier, I started a strategic planning exercise, which worked really well. I used it mainly to ensure that my team and directs are all working off the same data. Even more important, we are driving for the same outcomes. The entire team is bought into the mandate, except a couple of them. One of them is Ray, my VP of manufacturing, hasn't really bought into the change. So he sticks out like a sore thumb. Last week, I finally told him that he has to move on. I cannot achieve the mandate without him in the role, so I knew I had to do it. So you see what's happening over here? It's a total, I'm the expert in the room. I know what to achieve. You people come behind me. I'll make it happen, right? So I'm not interested in relationships. I'm not interested in understanding people from an emotional perspective. I'm only interested in getting the job done. So moving on, because I think we are kind of going ahead of time. To engage in empathy listening, that is level 3, we have to open our heart. And while we have to accommodate not just the data, but also the emotions and feelings of people as well. And that's when we are compassionate and empathic and start seeing things through the eyes of another person. We put ourselves in their shoes and look at things from their perspective. And now this is great for shared wisdom. I'm not the only wise person in the room. Everybody out here is also wise. So there's shared wisdom and teamwork that is happening, collaborative partnerships that are happening. The focus is on positive, healthy relationships. Also, we are not playing by previously held assumptions, but constantly, continually, we're evaluating them moment to moment on a daily basis. And we value diversity, appreciate uniqueness and individuality. So a quick example here. We had this tough year, but I want all of us to be together. Together, we will work towards not just surviving, but thriving in the midst of all this crisis. We've evaluated the business and we have decided we want everyone in the room to be a part of the company's future. Tomorrow's meeting will be an opportunity for all of us to participate in creating that future. I urge all of us to jump in and give us your best thinking. I believe when we talk through multiple perspectives, I wind up feeling more confident that we are doing the right thing. So see how everything here is about teamwork, shared wisdom, the power of the human connection, the power of the human bonding, right? So moving to the next level, which is generative listening. And for this, we have to open our gut, the seat of intuition, right? And gut is the seat for soul work, mindfulness, meditation, dreams, potential, and possibilities. And we are shifting the focus, not just to accommodate others from a data perspective, but also to accommodate others from the emotional perspective, and also to accommodate thinking from the big picture and looking at the systems level thinking, moving to the balcony and looking at the picture from there, the helicopter view, and also looking at how we can create generational thinking. What does our next generation have in terms of our future? How can we make things sustainable and environment oriented? And it's about operating in the realm of the mind, the heart, and the gut together. That is the cognition, the emotion, and the intuition all coming together and working in the domains of doing, relating, and being. The be, where we exist with our authentic self. We really cannot exist in the be state without existing at our true most authentic self. It's about, and this space, we are holding this space for something new to be born, which is where disruptions happen, which is where highest creativity and innovations happen. And it creates a space for very, very deep listening, where we can hold silence and stillness and create an infinite amount of curiosity for all people to come forward and function together. This is where insights happen. And the focus is on co-creating highest futuristic possibilities by reframing, by breaking boundaries. And this is characterized by authenticity, high levels of integrity, and amazing levels of creativity. Right? The partnership is generative because the focus is on not just a system, but a system that is constantly being generated, the system that is renewing itself time and again, right? And so the systems that will reinforce and work upon themselves. That's generative thinking. Very, very difficult to reach this level of thinking, this level of listening, but that's where the vertical development and the growth mindset together kind of meet and make it happen. And it's a journey for all of us to reach here. A very quick example on this, and then we'll open up to questions. My way of approaching things is to engage with each group in an empathic way. I ask people, do I understand your concern correctly? What do you think about this idea? Normally, when we ask people, we ask about, hey, what is good about this? How much do we ask about their concerns? How much do we actually kind of invite discomfort and ambiguity in our lives? I think it's rooted in feeling more and more at ease in uncomfortable situations. It's developed in a gradual way, more from my meditation practice. Working with people, teams, and organizations, the metaphor that comes to me is an energy field, energy leadership. I need to set up a container or a force field around the group, create conditions that would make it compelling for them to step up, get aligned, and take collective responsibility for acting on what they already know they need to do. For instance, we might be at a place when the team is stuck, and then a new energy comes in that allows the group to shift and reformulate the issue at hand in a more holistic way. So at the level of factual listening, I'm actually saying, hey, I can lead, come follow me. At the level of empathetic listening, I'm saying, hey, we all can lead. But at the level of generative listening, we are actually saying, hey, I trust you, you can lead. We are able to step out of the way and allow the person to lead, because at the level of generative listening, we are building the curriculum of character, trust, and respect. So that's it for today. But yes, I would love to hear your questions and your inputs around this.
First, Asma, what an amazing slide deck you have. Such great models, and you've outlined it in such a way that is concrete yet open at the same time. So I do have one question, and then others, feel free to take yourself off mute and ask your question after I'm finished. My question is, as you're working with your clients and you work with them all across the globe, do you actually share this content with them at some point in your coaching? Because this is sometimes things we can't get to on our own in a coaching relationship.
Well, we don't have that much time to share this in so much detail, which is why we do webinars. But then a general context, like something that a client is stuck with. You know, you can talk about amygdala hijack. Something else the client is stuck with. You can talk about listening skills and the power of listening and communicating the right way. So depending on the client's situation, you bring forward that psychological tool or that framework, which kind of sets into the client's agenda, and then give the deeper understanding to the client, and supplement it with a powerful question, because without the question, you're not building the curiosity.
I have a question.
Great, and just a...
Sorry, excuse me. Go ahead.
Yes, any questions, any thoughts, any inputs?
I have a question. I was wondering if you have a list of references, if we want to delve into this information further and see how researchers derived their conclusions. They're very fascinating conclusions.
Yeah, so sorry, I did not get your name.
It's Catherine Dorton.
Sure.
Sorry.
So Catherine, if you actually see this model, it's a mix of neuroscience combined with theory U, Otto Scharmer's theory U, where he talks about the 4 levels of listening, combined with growth mindset, and the leadership agility, where we talk about the various forces. So I'm generally a person who works with a lot of patterns and putting things together. So if there's anything particular that you're looking at more information about, feel free to write back to me. I'll put up my email ID in the chat, and I'll be able to share a lot more context with you in terms of whatever you want to refer. Just feel free to write back to me.
Thank you.
Asma, there's some questions about whether your slide deck will be made available. For those who are listening, it is being recorded and the recording will be available. Is your slide deck something that you will be willing to share as well?
Totally. Yes, totally. I'll share it with Carrie. Is that okay, Carrie? I'll share it with you and you can pass it on to our audience.
Great. Yes, of course. Thank you.
Sure. So there's a question here. Are there specific moments? Sorry, 1 minute. Are there specific models for assisting clients to go deeper into their personal or emotional stories? Yeah, so something that I do and may kind of, resonate with you is because I'm a deep behavior transformational coach. So I work a lot with emotions of people, deep emotions of clients. So I normally give them an insight into what is transactional goal and what is a transformational goal, right? What is that goal wherein you can actually get something quick, something short-term addressed, right? And where are those goals where you can actually work out something deep and long and sustainable and impactful in your life that is very transformational, that can create a much deeper change in you. So when you see the difference between transactional and transformational, clients automatically open up and say, hey, not just this agenda, but overall in life, this is what I'm actually going through. And this is my personal story. It happens in every single session. If you're able to bring out the difference between to them in terms of short-term goals versus long-term goals.
I have a question about generative listening.
Yes.
For example, you want to create these generative listening opportunities, and then you bring up things such as soul and spirituality and things that you feel comfortable with, but there's others in the room who just feel like immediately shut down when you bring up that soul and spirituality types of stuff. Is there a way we could kind of move around that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Shelly. And I have gone through that. I'm a vulnerable person, and I share my own journey to these people in terms of the way I have built a context with soul and spirituality in my life. The other thing is that the core of my leadership that I dig into most deeply is spirituality, dreams, and intuition, right? A mix of three crazy things that people kind of generally want to shy away from. So bring that vulnerability forward and talk to the clients in terms of what it means to you, because when it means to you is when it will mean to the clients as well. So there's a client of mine who wants to open a wellness studio in Japan, undergoing a spiritual journey. So he wants to be a spiritual guru. I'm kind of taking him all the way through an intuition framework to finally land him into that, higher calling, that personal space where he can actually understand his spirituality and his personal calling, because when he understands that is when he'll be able to impact others with that level of spirituality. So I think the core is about focusing on ourselves first in terms of what we understand about these things and what we actually feel about these things. If we bring that into our lives, we are able to bring it to others. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful.
Sure, sure.
That
Yeah,
sounded
totally.
like the power.
Yeah. Yes, please go ahead.
No, I was going to say that sounds like the power of story, brand story, branding and storytelling in cognitive change and the acceptance of concept. I love the PowerPoint. I love the presentation. A lot of information there, power packed. Yeah,
Sure,
just
thank
just
you.
a lot of information. Very good. The emotional intelligence component was huge, and then the energy leadership. I like that energy
Yes,
leadership. That's I have not heard that before. So thank you for that.
sure. I was kind of a little worried about packing so much in one presentation, but I think it went well. So thank you. Thank you for the validation. It helps.
Yes, it went very well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree, Asma. You're getting some great feedback in the chat that you've packed so much in, but you did it in a way that was just so palatable and easily understood. In fact, someone said this is the easiest neuroscience description they've seen. So well done, well done. I know we're hitting the top of the hour. I'm assuming that Asma and I can stay on for a couple more minutes. This presentation is being recorded and the slide deck will also be made available. If you email me, I can send you the deck and then we will post the recording. This is such a great topic, such a richness to it. And I encourage those who'd like to stay for another minute to ask a question, please do. For those who have to leave, have a wonderful day and thank you for participating. Someone asked about
Very quickly,
Asma's
Katie, my
email. It is in the
ID
chat,
out
but
there.
I'll add it again. Sorry, whoever was speaking, go ahead.
I do have a question. Where do you find the combination of what you're teaching right now? Because you've got the mindfulness, the meditation, you've got the leadership coaching, the energy leadership, and you've also got the neurogenerative plasticity and all of that. Where do you find that? Is that, I mean, I've been in fielding for a moment. Is that within that certification?
Not really. This is my own model that I have developed, putting
Okay.
things together. I'm a combination of an arranger and a pattern maker, so I guess this comes a little easily to me.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. I was just wondering about that because that's phenomenal. So if I wanted to know more about that, I would contact you.
Yes, please. I would love to get all your inputs and your queries. And the privilege for you when you actually send me an email is that I'm going to put a lot of case studies and a lot more information when I write back to you.
Okay,
So
I'm going to
feel free.
email you immediately. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
Do you have like any books or anything that we could purchase or access? Because it's really fascinating. This is like the first thing that I have done in coaching. I started in September, but you know, what better place to start than the biological, and you know, how it translates into so many facets and aspects. But if this is your own theory, I hope you've written a book, some sort of text or something.
Yeah, there's one chapter that I've written in the book of innovations. There's a book, Innovations in Leadership Coaching, that is published by Fielding Graduate University, wherein all of us as authors, a group of 26, 27 authors, we have come together and put 17 chapters for the book. So the chapter that I have written is the neuroscience and mindfulness of coaching in VUCA context for leaders. So that's one. But if you're talking in reference to this model, and this is the next stage of research that I'm still doing, as I'm kind of building this model, and but this is not published as yet.
Are you actually doing like imaging studies to, back up your theory, or is that part of your research?
Neuroscience is that kind of a subject where there's nothing that you can actually talk about without proper research. So I'm going to go deeper into all of this, into neuroscience, mindfulness, the various levels of listening, growth mindset. I actually wanted to understand how neuroscience, what happens in the brain when it comes to growth mindset, what happens with the brain when you're shifting from one stage to the other stage in psychological development, the vertical stages of development. So that's the next level of research that I'm still digging into. I've got some bit of it already lined up, but there's a lot more that I have to do. It's work in progress, frankly.
Okay. Well, this is what really fascinates me. I wanted to be a neuropsychologist. I wanted to retread, but I didn't. And I have a daughter and son-in-law who do have their PhDs in neuroscience from USC. And it's just so much fun to talk to them. And I really, really appreciate this. What a great introduction to this field. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Asma, for your time and for being here all the way from India. I know it's late at night for you. So we're going to go ahead and end the recording. And please feel free to email me. Feel free to email Asma. I have put the link to the book and the title of the book in chat. Her chapter is chapter 7. And for those who are interested in the deck, please email me. I'll get that to you. And then her recording will be available on the Fielding website. I hope everybody has a wonderful day. And Asma, thank you again. This was a really rich and amazing presentation.
Sure. Thank you for being such a great audience. Bye.